Let's be absolutely clear about what this means. Toronto's average home price peaked at around $1.3 million in early 22. It's already fallen to approximately $1.08 million by the end of 2025, a drop of roughly 17%. The projected 4.5% decline in 2026 would bring prices down to around $1.03 million. To put that in perspective, Toronto home prices were at this same level back in 2020, 6 years of gains completely erased. The documents I found from the Toronto Region Real Estate Board paint an even darker picture than the headlines suggest. Home prices declined 6.4% in the GTA in 2025 alone, with sales volume dropping 11.2% compared to 2024, while new listings increased 10.1%. This is the definition of a buyer's market in distress: fewer buyers, more sellers, and relentless downward pressure on prices. But here's what they're not telling you about the condo crisis specifically. Toronto built a record number of condo towers over the past decade, and now thousands of units are being completed and delivered to investors who can't afford to close or can't find tenants to cover their carrying costs. Recent data showed that only 54 new condos were sold in Toronto in a single month in 2025, a multi-decade low that reveals just how frozen this market has become. The real reason Toronto is number one on this list isn't just the price decline, it's the cascading effects that will ripple through the entire economy. Toronto's housing market represents roughly 20%. When Toronto crashes, it pulls down surrounding markets, destroys consumer confidence, forces banks to tighten lending, and creates a downward spiral that becomes self-reinforcing. Here's the mortgage renewal nightmare in specific numbers. Approximately 1.15 million Canadians will renew their mortgages in 2026, with a huge concentration in the Greater Toronto Area. These are people who locked in rates around 1.5% in 2021 and will now face rates around 4% or higher. For someone with an $800 mortgage in Toronto, which is below average, that's a monthly payment increase of over $1,600 per month for 5 years. Think about what that does to household budgets, consumer spending, retirement savings. Think about the families forced to choose between keeping their home and feeding their kids properly. This isn't hyperbole, this is the math, and it's unavoidable. The unemployment factor makes everything worse. Toronto's unemployment rate has been climbing, reaching
6.8% by the end of 2025. Job security concerns are at their highest level since the 2008 financial crisis. When people lose jobs in this environment, they can't just sell their homes and move on because prices have fallen below what they owe. They're trapped in negative equity situations with no good options. Ron Butler, a prominent Ontario mortgage broker, put it bluntly just hours ago. It's going to get worse in 2027. He cites unemployment, lack of international students, tensions between Canada and the US, and upcoming mortgage renewals as reasons for his dire predictions. One thing for sure is that it's going to get worse in Ontario. There is no possibility of better. Professor Victor Couture from the University of Toronto's Economic Analysis Department confirms that home prices will continue to decline in 2026, though he admits it's impossible to predict by how much. He makes a crucial point. Without rapid population growth, very low interest rates, or strong economic growth, home prices won't rise significantly or at all. And right now, Toronto has none of those three factors working in its favor. Here's the emotional reality that hits hardest. Toronto has been the promised land for millions of Canadians and immigrants who believed that owning a piece of this city meant financial security for life. Parents borrowed against their homes to help kids buy condos, convinced it was the best gift they could give. Young professionals sacrificed everything, living in tiny apartments, never taking vacations, eating instant noodles to save for down payments. They did everything right according to the conventional wisdom they were fed. The wealthy will survive this crisis. They always do. They have diversified investments, paid off properties, and the resources to weather any storm. But the middle class and working families who bet everything on Toronto real estate are about to learn a devastating lesson about market cycles and financial fragility. So, what should you take away from all this? These 8 cities represent the leading edge of a housing crisis that's been building for years and is finally breaking into the open in 2026. Just 14 hours ago, Royal LePage dropped a bombshell forecast that sent shockwaves through Ontario's real estate market. Their chief economist confirmed what many feared but few wanted to admit. Canada's 2 most expensive housing markets are headed for a significant price correction in 2026, with Toronto expected to see a devastating 4.5% decline. But here's what they didn't tell you about the cities that will be hit even harder. Number 5 on this list has an oversupply crisis so severe that condo owners are trapped with no way out. And number 1, while this city is facing a perfect storm of economic factors that could wipe out 6 years of price gains in a single year, the documents I found from the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation reveal something shocking about mortgage renewals that will affect 1.15 million Canadians this year. And the numbers will blow your mind. Here's what they don't want you to know. Number 8, Windsor's housing market is standing on the edge of a cliff, and most homeowners have no idea how steep the drop could be. This border city has been riding high on spillover demand from Detroit, but 2026 is bringing a harsh reality check that nobody saw coming. The real issue here isn't just about prices. It's about what happens when your entire economy depends on one industry, and that industry is facing unprecedented uncertainty. Windsor's automotive sector has been the backbone of this city for generations, but with trade tensions escalating between Canada and the United States, the vulnerability is now impossible to ignore. Recent forecasts show that if U.S. tariffs hit Canadian auto exports, Windsor will be ground zero for job losses. We're talking about thousands of manufacturing jobs that support the entire housing market ecosystem. Here's the part that should terrify you. Windsor saw a massive price surge during the pandemic when buyers fled Toronto's astronomical prices. Homes that were worth $350,000 in 2020 skyrocketed to over $600,000 by early 22. That's a 71% increase in less than 2 years. The problem, those gains weren't backed by fundamental economic growth or wage increases. They were purely speculative, driven by cheap money and people desperate to own anything. Now, the chickens are coming home to roost with mortgage rates that have tripled since 2021. Those same buyers who overpaid are facing renewal rates around 4% compared to the 1.47% they locked in. That's adding hundreds, sometimes over $1,000 to monthly payments. And in a city where the median household income is $74,000, significantly below the provincial average, this payment shock is forcing difficult decisions. But that's not the worst part. Windsor's inventory levels have been climbing steadily throughout 2025, with homes sitting on the market twice as long as they did 2 years ago. Sellers are getting desperate, and sellers mean falling prices. The Royal LePage forecast projects modest growth for Windsor at around 3%, but local brokers I've spoken with paint a darker picture. They're seeing bidding wars completely disappear, inspection conditions making a comeback, and price reductions becoming the norm rather than the exception. The real reason behind this decision is economic fragility. When your city's fortunes are tied so closely to cross-border trade in a single industry, any disruption sends shock waves through the housing market. And with political uncertainty at an all-time high, those disruptions are no longer hypothetical. What happens next will surprise you. Number 7, London, Ontario, has been called the next big thing in Canadian real estate for years now. But 2026 might be the year that myth finally dies. This mid-sized city between Toronto and Windsor has seen explosive growth that simply cannot be sustained, and the cracks are already showing in ways that should alarm every homeowner and investor. The headline statement is simple. London's housing market grew too fast, too soon, and now gravity has taken over. Between 2019 and 2022, Average home prices in London nearly doubled, jumping from around $330,000 at the peak. Think about that for a moment. A city with a population of just 420,000 people, where the major employers are hospitals, universities, and insurance companies, somehow convince itself that homes should cost as much as they do in major metropolitan areas. The key issues are affordability and economic fundamentals that don't support current valuations. London's median household income is approximately $78,000. Using the standard lending rule that you can afford a home worth 4 times your income, the maximum supportable home price in London should be around $312,000, yet homes are selling for more than double that amount. This disconnect isn't sustainable, and the market is starting to acknowledge this painful truth. What the documents I found reveal something shocking about London's rental market. The city has seen a massive influx of international students, which propped up the rental and housing markets for years. But with federal government changes to international student visas and caps on enrollment, that support system is crumbling. Universities in London are projecting significant decreases in international enrollment for 2026, which means less rental demand, more investor panic, and more properties flooding the market. Local real estate agents are reporting a phenomenon they're calling the London freeze, where sellers list properties at 2022 prices, but buyers refuse to budge, resulting in stalemates that last months. Eventually, economic reality forces sellers to capitulate, and when they do, comparable sales drop across entire neighborhoods. This domino effect is just beginning. The emotional appeal here is real. If you bought in London thinking you were getting Toronto level appreciation at a discount, you're about to learn a hard lesson about market fundamentals. The path to wealth shouldn't be speculating on housing in mid-sized cities with limited economic diversification, but that's the mindset that's been fed to people for years and is now unraveling in real time. Here's what they don't want you to know about the next city. Number 6, Kitchener-Waterloo. Kitchener-Waterloo positioned itself as Canada's Silicon Valley, the innovation corridor that would rival Toronto's tech scene. But in 2026, that narrative is collapsing faster than a failed startup, and homeowners are about to feel the pain. This region bet everything on the tech sector, and now that bet is backfiring spectacularly. The tech industry has been hemorrhaging jobs across North America, and Kitchener-Waterloo hasn't been spared. Companies that were hiring aggressively just 2 years ago are now laying off workers, and some are shutting down entirely. When your housing market is built on the assumption of endless tech growth and high-paying jobs, what happens when that growth stops? The average home price in Kitchener-Waterloo fell 6.9% year over year in 2025, dropping to $64,300. That might sound modest, but it represents hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost equity for homeowners who bought at the peak. And the RE/MAX forecast for 2026 isn't offering much hope, projecting prices will remain relatively flat for the first half before easing modestly in the second half. Translation: more declines are coming. What's particularly troubling is the inventory situation. Listings have increased significantly throughout 2025, giving buyers far more negotiating power than they've had in years. Homes that are overpriced or outdated are sitting on the market for months, sometimes getting relisted at drastically reduced prices after failing to attract buyers the first time around. Here's what the data really shows. The median days has nearly doubled compared to 2023. That's not a sign of a healthy market. That's a sign of a market in distress. Sellers are desperately trying to get their original asking prices, but buyers know they have the upper hand and are refusing to overpay. The real-life impact: families who relocated to Kitchener-Waterloo for tech jobs are now facing layoffs and underwater mortgages simultaneously. They can't afford to stay, but they also can't afford to sell without taking massive losses. They're trapped, and this situation is becoming more common by the day. This number will blow your mind when you see what's happening in the next city. Number 5, Mississauga. Mississauga, the so-called Brooklyn to Toronto's Manhattan, is experiencing a condo crisis so severe it deserves its own documentary. This city of 800,000 people right next to Toronto has become ground zero for Canada's condo oversupply disaster. And 2026 is when the full weight of this crisis will crush property values. Let's talk numbers that should terrify every condo owner and investor. Mississauga has been on a building spree for the past decade, with dozens of high-rise towers shooting up across the city. The problem? They built way too many, way too fast, and now the market is drowning in supply. Recent data shows that condo prices in Mississauga and Brampton are at their lowest levels since the pandemic, and they're still falling. Royal LePage forecasts that condominiums across Canada will decrease 2.5% in 2026, but in markets like Mississauga, with severe oversupply, the real declines will be much steeper. Some local brokers are whispering about drops of 5 to 10% from current levels, which would represent catastrophic losses for investors who bought pre-construction units expecting appreciation. Here's the shocking truth they don't tell you. Thousands of condo units are scheduled to be completed and delivered to buyers in 2027. What happens when hundreds of desperate investors try to sell their brand new condos simultaneously? A price collapse. I'm already seeing the early warning signs. Investors are offering massive incentives to assume their purchase agreements, sometimes offering to pay $50,000 or more just to get out of their obligations. That's not a sign of a healthy market, that's panic. The emotional appeal is devastating. Imagine being a young couple who bought a pre-construction condo in 2022, believing you were securing your future. You put down your life savings as a deposit, maybe even borrowed from family. Now you're facing closing day, but the property is worth $100,000 less than what you owe. The bank's appraisal comes in low, so you need to come up with an extra $100,000 cash just to close, or you lose your deposit and get sued. This isn't hypothetical. This is happening to real people right now in Mississauga. Wait until you see how the documents I found reveal the next city's hidden vulnerability. Number 4, Hamilton, Burlington. Hamilton and Burlington were supposed to be Toronto's affordable alternative, but 2026 is exposing the fatal flaw in that logic. These cities are facing a double whammy of falling prices and rising carrying costs that's creating a perfect storm for homeowners. The average residential sale price in Hamilton, Burlington has decreased 3% year over year in 2025 from $80,1074 to $783,254. That might not sound catastrophic, but remember, Hamilton prices increased 80% between 2016 and 2022. People who bought during the frenzy paid top dollar, and they're now watching their equity evaporate while their mortgage payments increase. Here's what makes Hamilton, Burlington particularly vulnerable. These markets attracted a huge wave of buyers who were priced out of Toronto, including first-time buyers who stretched their finances to the absolute limit to get in the market. They bought homes at the peak with the minimum down payment and maximum leverage, betting that continued appreciation would bail them out. That bet is now failing spectacularly. The real estate board reported that in September 2025 alone, prices dropped 9.4% compared to the previous year. That's not a gradual cooling, that's a crash. And the forecast for 2026 shows only modest recovery with a projected 2% increase, which means prices will remain well below peak levels for the foreseeable future. But that's not the worst. The worst part is the mortgage renewal crisis that's about to hit this region especially hard. Hamilton, Burlington is one of the highest concentrations of highly leveraged homeowners in Ontario. When these mortgages come up for renewal in 2026, it rates 3 to 4 times higher than what they're currently paying. Payment shock will be brutal. Think about this. Someone with a $600,000 mortgage who have been paying 1.5% interest will see their monthly payment jump from about $2,400 to over $3,600 when they renew at 4%. That's an extra $1,200 per month or $14,400 per year for a household earning the median income in Hamilton of around $82,000. That's an impossible burden. The real reason behind this crisis is overextension, fueled by fear of missing out. People bought homes they couldn't truly afford banking on continued low rates and endless appreciation. Both of those assumptions are now dead, and the consequences are devastating. Some families will be forced to sell at losses, others will face foreclosure, and those who manage to hang on will be house poor for years, unable to afford anything beyond their mortgage payments. Here's what they don't want you to know about how this affects the broader economy. Number 3, Markham, the affluent suburb north of Toronto, has always been considered a safe haven for real estate investment, high-income families, excellent schools, strong Asian community ties that had all the ingredients for sustained property values. But 2026 is revealing that no area is immune when the fundamentals turn against you. The headline statement that should grab attention: Markham is experiencing a silent crisis where luxury homes are sitting unsold for months, a phenomenon that would have been unthinkable just 3 years ago. Properties listed over $2 million, which used to attract multiple offers within days, are now languishing on the market with zero interest. The key issue is that Markham's market was heavily driven by two forces: wealthy immigrants, particularly from China, and professionals working in Toronto's financial and tech sectors. Both of these pillars are crumbling. Canadian immigration policy has shifted dramatically with reduced targets and increased scrutiny on foreign buyers. Meanwhile, layoffs in Toronto's financial district and tech sector are hitting Markham residents hard because they commute to these jobs.
What makes this particularly painful is the property tax burden. Markham has some of the highest property taxes in the GTA, and when you're paying $15,000 to $20,000 annually in property taxes on a home that's declining in value, many homeowners are realizing they're paying luxury holding costs for assets that are depreciating. The emotional impact hits differently in Markham because this is a community where real estate has been viewed as the ultimate status symbol and wealth preservation strategy. Families sacrificed everything to buy the biggest house possible, believing it was the safest investment. Now they're discovering that when the market turns, luxury properties fall harder and faster than affordable ones because the buyer pool is much smaller. Here's what the numbers show about behavioral changes. For sale signs that used to be sources of pride are now quietly appearing on streets where neighbors have known each other for decades. There's a sense of shame mixed with panic. Families whispering about friends who've lost hundreds of thousands on paper and are desperately trying to sell before it gets worse. The real reason this matters: Markham represents the psychology of an entire generation of buyers who believe Canadian real estate only goes up. When that belief system shatters in a place like Markham, it sends a powerful message to the entire market. Wait until you see what's really happening in the next city. Number 2, Brampton. Brampton, once the hottest market in the GTA, is now facing a reckoning that could reshape the entire region's housing landscape. This city of 700,000 people has been Canada's fastest growing municipality, but that growth is now working against it in ways that are only becoming apparent in 2026. The average home price in Brampton has been relatively more stable than surrounding areas, which sounds like good news until you understand why. Brampton experienced more moderate price drops because prices were already under pressure before the broader market correction began. The market has been weakening for longer, which means the recovery will take longer too. Here's what makes Brampton uniquely vulnerable. This city has the highest concentration of heavily mortgaged, multi-generational households in Ontario. Families pooled resources from multiple income earners to qualify for mortgages that no single household could afford. When one person loses their job or when mortgage payments increase by $1,000 monthly on renewal, these delicate financial arrangements collapse like house of cards. The RE/MAX forecast projects Brampton will remain a buyer's market in 2026 with increasing inventory and dropping interest rates. That sounds promising for buyers, but it's a nightmare for existing owners. A buyer's market means prices stay depressed, equity doesn't rebuild, and selling becomes increasingly difficult. Rental market dynamics are also working against Brampton homeowners. Many bought homes expecting to rent out basement apartments to mortgages, but with government crackdowns on illegal rentals and reduced immigration, Finding tenants has become harder while rental income requirements have become stricter. Homeowners who budgeted on rental income are now scrambling to cover full carrying costs themselves. Here's the data that should terrify you. The inventory to sales ratio in Brampton has been climbing steadily, meaning there are more homes for sale relative to buyers than at any point since 2017. This imbalance puts downward pressure on prices and gives buyers enormous negotiating leverage. But the real story isn't just about numbers, it's about broken dreams. Brampton represents the aspirations of hundreds of thousands of immigrant families who came to Canada believing home ownership was the pathway to prosperity. They worked multiple jobs, sacrificed vacations and luxuries, saved every penny to buy homes. Now many are discovering they bought at the worst possible time, and the equity they worked so hard to build has vanished. The psychological toll is immense. In a community where homeownership is deeply tied to identity and success, facing declining values feels like personal failure. Families are hiding their financial struggles from friends and extended family, pretending everything is fine while privately panicking about mortgage renewals they know they can't afford. This sets the stage for our number one city where 6 years of gains could be wiped out. Number one, Toronto, its worst crisis in 3 decades, and what happens here will determine the fate of housing markets across the entire country. Royal LePage just confirmed that Toronto's aggregate home price will decrease 4.5% in 2026, and experts warn this could erase 6 years of price appreciation in a single year.